Albert, besides being an elegant, well-looking young man, was also possessed of considerable talent and ability. Moreover, he was a viscount, a recently created one, certainly. But in the present day, it is not necessary to go as far back as Noah in tracing a descent, and a genealogical tree is equally estimated, whether dated from 1399 or merely 1815. But to crown all these advantages, Albert de Morcerf commanded an income of 50,000 livres, a more than sufficient sum to render him a personage of considerable importance in Paris. It was, therefore, no small mortification to him to have visited most of the principal cities in Italy without having excited the most trifling observation. Albert, however, hoped to indemnify himself for all these slights and indifferences during the Carnival, knowing full well that among the different states and kingdoms in which the festivity is celebrated, Rome is the spot where even the wisest and gravest throw off the usual rigidity of their lives, and deign to mingle in the follies of this time of liberty and relaxation. The Carnival was to commence on the morrow. Therefore, Albert had not an instant to lose in setting forth the program of his hopes, expectations, and claims to notice. With this design, he had engaged a box in the most conspicuous part of the theater, and exerted himself to set off his personal attractions by the aid of the most rich and elaborate toilet. The box taken by Albert was in the first circle, although each of the 3 tiers of the boxes is deemed equally aristocratic, and is, for this reason, generally styled the nobilities boxes. And although the box engaged for the 2 friends was sufficiently capacious to contain at least a dozen persons, it had cost less than would be paid at some French theaters for one admitting merely 4 occupants. Okay, Albert's got some plans to put himself on the scene, getting himself out there, getting himself seen. I just rhymed scene with scene, but they were 2 different versions of the word. Does that count? Get Eminem on the phone. I got some questions. Okay, what to talk about exactly? You know what? Here, let's break down some nuance here as I adjust myself in my seat. I've been sitting here for a while. Albert commanded an income of 50,000 livres, a more than sufficient sum to render him a personage of considerable importance in Paris. Okay, so he is an important person of sorts back home. Home being Paris, I'm assuming that is home. Otherwise, why phrase it that way? He's mortified that no one has really paid him any notice here. He's a viscount, a title I recognized from reading Phantom of the Opera earlier this year. Raoul in Phantom of the Opera is a viscount. And I just looked up a hierarchy of nobility. It turns out you go duke, marquis, earl or a count, viscount, or baron. Interesting that you can be called an earl or a count. I wonder if that is a regional thing. The Earl of Monte Cristo doesn't quite have the same ring to it, does it? But it is a hereditary title, someone who would govern a territory in the absence of the count. But I think that by the mid-19th century, when this story is set, it's basically just a decorative title, because there's no real responsibility connected to governance at that point. Maybe it's like a vice president title. You're just kind of waiting to see what happens to the count because you are waiting in the wings. Maybe vice president. I wonder if that is connected to viscount, vi being spelled V-I-S-C-O-U-N-T. Interesting. You know what I'm kind of recognizing here? I can't really do any kind of application of it, but there's lots of talk of reputation in these last couple chapters, isn't there? Because we're talking about how Luigi Vampa got his reputation as one of the most fearsome bandits Rome has ever seen. Cucumetto had a very brutal reputation that had reached the ears of Luigi and Teresa at one point. Now we're talking about Albert's reputation back home, but that reputation hasn't reached here. Pastrini was surprised that Albert and Franz hadn't heard of Vampa's reputation. I'm wondering if that's a Dumas thing or if that's just an era thing. I seem to remember, yeah, it was back in the Morel chapters when we were talking about his reputation being tarnished, that reputation was almost as important as actual currency, that you couldn't get favors anymore, you couldn't establish credit, people wouldn't work with you if you had a bad reputation, that is. But what Albert is experiencing here, and kind of on the heels of Pastrini being surprised that they hadn't heard the reputation of Vampa, to me says that it's kind of, in addition to being a sort of social currency, it really is tied to a personal identity in a way that's like, if you don't know who I am, then that can be a personal offense to me. And perhaps in a way that I don't fully comprehend, where Albert might seem a little bit less condescending or narcissistic, though I wouldn't necessarily have called him narcissistic before this, but self-involved. Maybe more allowances need to be made for his experience here, because if he's used to having his social reputation open doors for him, start conversations, then it would be a bit of a letdown. Would it be a personal offense? I don't know. If his reputation didn't reach to these cities in Italy, to this point, there's been nothing to indicate that his reputation should have reached this far. So is it a case of him expecting something and not getting it, the kind of self-entitled nature of a rich person, or is it a more existential thing? Who I am no longer has any meaning here, and therefore I don't know what to do. I have to work harder, or whatever the case might be. It feels like there's a whole essay that could be written about reputation in Dumas' work. But, however, if we want to add a layer to this, sorry, I was just about to end the episode, and it just occurred to me that in addition to identity, Dante is kind of doing reputation as like theater, almost a performance. He's creating identity, obviously. He's creating reputation. He's creating lore about whatever disguise he's wearing. Now, we can't answer the questions as to whether or not these reputations he's creating are attached to his like internal identity, or if they are just a performative identity for functional or manipulative uses. Interesting. Maybe that's something we should track as we go along. I'd be very curious just to be introduced to Dante again, really, to be honest. I just, like, who is this guy? What's he doing? Where's he at in his journey? It's been years and years and years and years. Hey, you know what? Maybe he's already gone and killed Fernand and Villefort and Danglars, and he's just living out his life somewhere. Well, here, obviously, he's in Rome. But maybe he's doing a whole new thing now. He's adapted Sinbad the Sailor because he no longer wants to remember the man who he was. He's adapted a whole new personality in order to quiet the demons in his head. I don't know. I just want to sit down and have a little conversation. I want to send an introduction letter to Dante and have him invite me to one of his parlor rooms and be like, Dante, what's going on with you, man? Tell me a little bit about yourself. Where are you these days? What's going through your mind? How you feeling about things? You think we'll get an invitation? I hope so. But we are not even halfway through chapter 34. So join me here tomorrow with a little bit more. Until then, okay, goodbye. The Countdown of Monte Cristo is part of the Gruntwork Podcast Network. This show is produced, edited, and hosted by Landon Solano. The original text of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Theme song by Magic Solo. If you want to support the show and others like it, visit patreon.com/gruntworkpod. Thank you for listening. See you tomorrow.